All right, well, welcome everybody to our second training conversation of 2023. My name is Don Hall. I'm training coordinator for Transition Network. I'm glad that you could all join us today. Very excited for today's topic, which is going to be engaging transitioners through information resources. With Philipp Grunewald. Philipp, am I saying your last name right?
Close enough.
Close enough. Okay. So as most of you know, this is an ongoing series of online events that is hosted by the International Transition Trainers Community of Practice, but which is open to anyone who wants to come and learn. So I'll be your host for the next few hours. Philipp will be speaking in English today, but we do have Spanish translation available, thanks to Zaida Amaral. And you can access that through the interpretation button in your main Zoom toolbar and selecting Spanish interpretation. So if that's of interest, please take advantage of that. Let's see. Just a couple of other tips before we get started. Please keep your microphone muted whenever you're not speaking, and keep your video on if possible. I know that's not necessarily possible for everyone, but we'd love to see your smiling face. And we will be recording this session to share with others who weren't able to attend live today. So I'll provide some additional instructions as we go along, but that should be good enough for now. I'd now like to introduce our featured presenter, Philipp Grunewald. So Philipp Grunewald began working with Transition Network towards the end of 2022 in a communications role. More recently, he also started holding the support infrastructure role, steward of Transition Network's information resources. Philipp has a varied background spanning corporate communications, international studies, and information science. As a practitioner and researcher, he has been supporting communities to work with information and digital technologies for more than a decade. Philipp has completed a PhD in information science focused on international knowledge exchanges and has plenty of lessons to share with the transition movement. And thank you for being here with us today, Philipp.
Thank you, Don. Yeah, welcome everyone. I think from what Don just said, what I want to emphasize today is the conversation aspect. So I have brought things prepared that I'm happy to share and talk about at length if necessary. But what I'm hoping to do is to have a conversation today with what is the training community in my eyes. So as Don just shared, I have two hats that I'm wearing in the transition movement. One is the hat of communications for Transition Network, the organization that supports the transition movement at the international level that you will be familiar with. And the second one is the what I call the resources hat. So very recently, I was made responsible for the resources we hold, the information resources. So when I'm resources, I refer to information resources. The information resources we hold, the PDFs and the knowledge base, so to speak, that's on the website of Transition Network and beyond. That is a more recent hat of mine. So what I want to get into is a conversation where I don't just talk, but also hear from you how you like to work with resources, some resources that you find particularly useful that you are using in your work as trainers in the transition movement, and also get into some reflections about what the value of those resources really is in us helping others understand what transition is about. That is the kind of landscape of the conversation today that I'm hoping to have. One thing that I will be doing is I'll be sharing my screen for quite a bit of this. I'll be sharing some slides I have prepared on a Miro board. I can share a link to those resources afterwards, so don't feel like you have to copy any of what's there. They will be obviously shared in the video recording, but I can also share a link to the resources if anyone wants to go in and copy any of the diagrams that I'll be showing. So that also just for you to know. What I would like to start with is a round of hearing from everyone what their interest in information resources is, and to also mention one resource that you find really, really useful for your work in helping others understand what transition is about. Is there one particular resource that you feel you find very valuable, something that exists in our ecosystem that you keep going back to, keep using in different spaces to help others understand what transition is about? So we'll do a round of everyone will get to speak. You can also briefly introduce yourself, but remember one resource that you find particularly useful and what that resource brings, right? What is it that makes it so valuable? I'll start with Don. I'll pick on the facilitators first, and then Don, if you don't mind handing it on to someone else after.
Yeah, I am excited to learn about more information resources that Transition Network has. I know that there's a lot out there that I'm currently not aware of. For example, I think I wrote this in an email to trainers. Lisa introduced me to this one around engaging youth for trouble, or empowering youth for troubled times, that was put together by Transition Italy and Transition Network. That was just fantastic. I think 4 or 5 different case studies of programs that transition initiatives have run with youth around the world. And really, as we think about our own strategies in training here to engage youth, I found it extremely valuable and eye-opening. So I'll go with that, and I will pass it to Lisa because she's right next to me on the screen.
Thank you. And I also wanted to mention the same resource because I'm a youth worker and working a lot with young people, and using quite a lot of those resources that are very, but not only this one, not only the manual, but also other very, I'm drawn towards resources that are very practical and kind of giving like a background information on how to set up the session. So kind of tangible and outlining the outcome, desired outcome, what the trainer should have at the end. So yeah, so this would be also my favorite resource at the moment, and but also the resources that we created a few years ago about the personal resilience skill set and mindset, and also the conflict resilience resources that we have. So basically sets of resources that are easy to follow and to refer to whenever needed. Yeah, and I pass to Zaida.
We're not able to hear you, Zaida. I think it's because you're in the interpretation channel. Are you able to switch back? Let's see. Maybe we could go to somebody else for the moment and come back to Zaida. So
Yes,
maybe Frederick.
Rakesh, do you want to go next, or Frederick?
Yes. Okay. Okay. Why not? Hello. So I don't use a lot of resources, but I'm very interested in resources. So I would like to. What I like is to find specific resources which are very important. I guess the resources on the website are a kind of selection already, and when I had a need, it was about being sure to know what is the identity of the movement in comparison to other movements, and I asked the question in the hub, and Lisa, I think, and Philipp gave me very practical and good resources about the principle to find again the main principles of transition that I didn't know. I didn't know these resources, and it was very useful for me. And since then, I use the guide, the essential guide for transition, also on the website, and that's all. But it was not a lot, but very practical for me, and very fast when I asked to on the hub. And I think thanks a lot for this. And I give the micro to Rakesh, of course.
Okay, thanks very much. So being dyslexic, well, my form of dyslexia, I really struggle to read. And I mean, I can understand words, but I just don't digest it. I can't give me a block of text. I just won't get the gist of what's in there. So a lot of the resources I find completely useless and inaccessible to me personally. So, so I don't often, I refer people when I'm doing trainings to the TN websites and, tell them to find stuff themselves. Obviously, the principles are really useful. But probably the resource that I have seen many times and do show very, very often is the TED Talk from Rob Hopkins, which really nice and clearly, very nice and concisely really explains a lot of the principles behind Transition Town, and from that all kinds of conversations can start happening. So I find that probably one of the most useful resources that I go to again and again. In terms of what I would like, I guess if there was some way to get access to some of the amazing information that you probably have squirreled away, if it could be presented in a more easy to find way, through mind maps or because my mind doesn't work in chunks, in blocks of text. It works with relationships, and I can retain and I can find, and I have, my head is full of information that I have built up through understanding relationships, not by reading text though. So yeah, so any form of information that could be presented in an easy way for me to access would be amazing, because I'm sure there's tons of great stuff out there. And I would like to pass on, well, should we try Zadia again? See if she's resolved her. No. Okay, Arturo, I'd love to hear from you.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Good morning from Colombia. Happy to see you. So in general, I use a lot of resources from the Transition Network website, where you have a lot of information. It's good divide. And normally I use a lot Transition next to you, where when you can find people who are next to you, making an initiative, or in a national hub. Use this map, I see what are the people doing, where are the people doing, and how you can connect with these people. No, sometimes this information is not actualized, so maybe you can contact with someone and it's already the information is from a long time ago and it's not new one. But in general, I use this Transition near me. It's a good resource use. Last year, like I was trying to understand a lot of things in transition because I was collaborating. This principle was very helpful that you already talked about it. So, but in general, all the information in the website is a really good one. Thank you. And I pass to, I don't know if anyone, Amandine or Ilewi. Oh, Mauricio Delis, my friend Mauricio from Noruega.
Mauricio, are you able to unmute?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. I have some problem because I am traveling the train now and I was late. I know that the meeting started already. And I think I'm going to stay here a little bit. What is going on?
One thing I've asked is if people know of a resource, an information resource that they use in their teaching and training that they keep going back to.
No, I haven't. I have no see them.
That's okay. We'll pass on to Zaida.
Thank you. I'm available now. Thank you, Don. I believe that when we are during trainings, we use a lot the resources of the principles and the essential guide, which we have translated in, helped translate with the Spanish and also in Portuguese. But I'd like to share something very personal to me that is not related to the period during the trainings, but during the fact that we are promoting transition and wanting more engagement in our region areas because Brazil is huge. And I'm speaking only for myself because I usually tend to stand behind my colleagues that are very knowledgeable in the resources. And we had a friend here, but she just left for some reason. But what for me is really, really helpful is when we have and I don't know exactly how to say where they are located because I usually don't go so often recently, but when we have information about many different stories of transition, because I believe that this is what captures people to go in, because until they see that, which happened to me when I was engaged into transition, until I see that, I don't know what is transition, almost like I still don't get it. I think it's a training, I think it's a course. But when I go into stories, then I understand that it's like, oh, it's what my neighbor is doing on the corner with his ONG or whatever. So that's what we refer to people, and that's where we're incentiving now the Brazil Hub to spread the word so we can get more of it here in Brazil. Thank you.
Ilevi, would you like to go next?
Okay, thank you for sharing, everybody. And well, I'm just now very focused on the launch. So when I think about materials and resources, it's actually what is in there in the program, and every piece is important in some way, or most of them. What I have worked with the most and used also in other contexts is the context cards. That's sort of my baby, and I have reworked them many times, and we're reworking them now too. And I think that is such a double work if everybody has to sit hours and hours and do that. So therefore, that was sort of my first question. Who did it last time, and why don't we share them and copy them from each other? What is the system for doing that? That was my question, one of my questions why I asked to come to join the group. And now we have already done it because the course is this weekend, so I couldn't wait for this meeting. The other thing is And I'm a little curious because some of you have said, oh, I use the material from the website and I don't know where this material is on the website. I would need information on that. And another question I have, I'm preparing this talk about inner transition, and I think it's great. There are so many pieces which are great in the launch. But there is something also because it's 8 years since I gave the launch and something has happened in society since then. And in Sweden, we feel it very, very much now with the extreme right gaining land and the a way of thinking which tips is everywhere now. So I think I feel a necessity to also reformulate the transition concept a little bit, maybe be even clearer about what it is, the difference from, for example, prepping, which the far right loves very much. We are not doing prepping, we are doing something else. So I'm very much into being exact about what transition is about. And then I stumbled over these 10 characteristics and I didn't know about them. And there are still the 8 principles, and what's their relation with each other, I don't know. And which am I going to use on Saturday? I still don't know. And I'm used to the 7 we had before. And actually, if I compare the 7 with the 8 and with the 10, I miss something in all of them. So I would like to reformulate everything, but I cannot because it's a sort of consensus process. Oh, I could talk for hours. I'm into all piece of resource for the launch, and I'm so curious to know what are you doing? How do you nowadays, sort of, because I'm in the process of updating myself from 8 years ago when I was into this. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go to Amandine last. Amandine, can you hear us?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Philip. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, today I don't have video functioning well. I'm local based in Portugal. I know some of you of different circles. I'm very happy to be here with you. In fact, it's the first time to be synchronously with the group that is working on the training reset. I've been aware and reading Aldwork's science roots, but I was not able to participate on the last webinars. Now with Don and also with the support of Lisa. I connect a lot with my previous colleague from Sweden, speak about, so I identified a lot with her. I did trainings on transition 10 years ago with my group in Portugal, but in terms of resources, I'm here to get inspired of what is being done and what is being collected and done in other countries, not in terms of language and translation, but because, well, yeah, the world changed a lot in 10 years, and it seems that the resources that we had in the past, of course, they are valuable and are great, but we need something else. And I'm here to contribute to that, also to get inspired and to prepare also to collaborate and to be part of the next trainings and to learn about what is being constructed on this. But in fact, in terms of resources, I've been inspired by other realms, other things that be done in other disciplines and practices and methods, not only in terms of the transition. I think we have a big problem with the name transition. It's something that at this moment we need something beyond that, because the word transition is being used in many realms, from the top to the down, something like this. So, well, but this is another big conversation, not for now. yeah, but basically I want to contribute to this resourcing thing, also to support Philip, well, and also to understand how we can adapt these in the trainings in Portugal, because there is a kind of stagnation in the process. There is some people working on transition in Portugal, but as a training process, not so much. So yeah, I'm here to get inspired and to contribute also and understand what we can do together. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you. So thank you, everyone. That was very interesting. Different resources, but also very different viewpoints. Rakesh sharing like a lot of this I don't find very useful because of the type of learner I am. I find like the observation that, you know, the world has changed a lot the last 8 and 10 years, and how do the resources that we do have still speak to the world we live in right now? And then there's the aspect of, do the resources we have, do they speak to the different contexts we have? So for example, do we have resources that we can actually use in across different hubs in different countries and across different languages and different cultures and different contexts? Are there things we can share, and what are the things we can't share? And when we do share resources that may be useful across different contexts, how much interpretation do we have to do when we use them to make them more understandable and relevant to the people we work with, the people we train, to the language that we are using to talk about these things? And then Rakesh also pointing to the formats, right? Information resources can be in all sorts of formats. They don't have to be written text. They could be diagrams, they could be videos, they could be podcasts, they could be all sorts of formats. So there is a lot of resources there. There is a lot of accumulated things. Let's just call them things for now. A lot of accumulated things over the last decade and more. And one of the questions that I've been asking myself and others is, how do we want to use these? What do we like? What is there that we want to use in 2023, like now? What is it? What work do we need to do to make more of these things useful for us? So I'll be starting to share my screen now. There's a few things I want to share to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. So just creating some common understanding of what we're referring to when we're talking about information resources, and getting a bit of an understanding of what their role could be. So I'll be sharing my screen to just talk about a few things that I have always found very useful to think about as I've been thinking about resources. So just to show you, we outline, we've just shared resources that we use in our work, some reflections on that. I want to now go into what do we mean when we talk about information resources, and what they got to do with learning, which is what I assume all of us is something we're doing and something we're trying to support others in, is learning. And there's a diagram that I like to use that is from my research time, and that's about the difference between data, information, knowledge, insights, and wisdom. And I find this, as people trying to support others in learning, I find this really useful to sometimes reflect back on the basics. So what do we mean when we talk about knowledge? What do we mean when we talk about information? So we're talking about information resources today, but what is the difference? And how do they relate to each other? So I'll mainly focus on data, information, and knowledge. We can talk about the other stuff down the line. But data is basically, the number 23 is a data point. That is data. The number 23 is a data point, but the number itself doesn't have any meaning. If you say it's 23 kilograms, you know by adding the kilograms that the 23 is a measure of a data point of weight. So 23 kilograms is a piece of information. Without the kilograms, it's just data. It's just the number 23. So what makes data information is a little bit of context. And that's one thing that is continuous across this scale from data to wisdom, is that we add layers of context and layers of complexity to whatever it is we're talking about. So say we have the information of 23 kilograms. That information in itself is not useful without any further context. If you say 23 kilograms means I have enough, my dog, or say my dog is of good health, of good weight, because it weighs 23 kilograms. That is knowledge. So because the information we have has become actionable. So 23 kilograms is information, but once you know what to do with that information, it's become knowledge. So one easy definition of knowledge that I always like to use is information in action. Like you do something with information, and that is having knowledge. You have knowledge when there is information you have and you can do something with that. So that is just something very basic. So when I talk about information resources, I'm talking about information here. So 23 kilograms is a very simple bit of information. There are much more complex pieces of information, like a document provides information. A document like the resources we've referred to can be 20 or 50 pages long, or a video can be 20 minutes long. But it's still information, because the person that consumes that information, that watches the video or reads the document, needs to decide what they do with that. It is, so far, it's a document on a website, but what that person wants to do with it, they have to convert it into something that is for them usable, that changes something about what they are able to do. So once they take a document or they watch a video and then they feel they can do something with that, that is when they have internalized, and we come back to that word, that information, and they can now do something with that. And that's, they have accumulated knowledge, so to speak, if you want to use the accumulation metaphor. They've enhanced their knowledge about a topic because they can now do things, and they can do things they couldn't do before, for example. So I just want to say that information, when we're talking about information resources, we're talking about something that in itself is not useful. Only when a person manages to digest what they are receiving from someone else, does it become useful. And I think that is one of the things that what Rakesh said earlier is a very good example for. If you are dyslexic, or if it's in the wrong language, or you're a visual learner rather than a visual learner rather than an auditory learner, then depending on the format, the information is still there, but it may not be accessible to you. And if it's not accessible to you, it's not useful. So it has no influence on what people know if it's not accessible to people. So making information accessible is a prerequisite for people enhancing their knowledge. And it sounds trivial, but a lot of the time we create information resources without thinking about making it accessible. So there is something we know, or we think we know, and we feel like we have to put that into some fixed form, a document or a video or a podcast or whatever it is. We need to fix it somehow in place. We need to record it, and then we share that. And that is the work we're doing. And we're thinking we're sharing our knowledge. And what I'm trying to generate a bit of awareness for is, there are steps there that we often underestimate that need to come to be considered for us to do a good job at this. So I just want to stop here for a second. if anyone wants me to clarify any of this, but I just wanted us to have a common language around this information resources and knowledge, which is something people use, a term people use a lot. Is there any clarifying questions you'd like to ask about what I've just talked about?
Feel free to just unmute yourself and.
Yes. Thanks, Don. Okay. So that seems sufficiently clear. One of the things I like to mention is, what about skills, right? So a skill is something else again. So a skill I often like to use as an example is riding a bicycle. Riding a bicycle is a skill. If someone gives you a book that explains, this is how you ride a bicycle, after you read that book, you cannot get onto the bicycle and do it immediately. And the reason for that is because it's a skill. It's not something that information can solve. Information is maybe part of you developing a skill. Your parents, when they teach you to ride a bicycle, explaining how to ride the bicycle is something that may help. But a skill is something you will only be able to learn through practicing the very thing you're trying to learn. That is the main difference with skills, is if you don't practice a skill, you will not learn a skill. So that's one of the key differences I believe that there are to skills, is you need to practice it, you need to do it yourself, but to learn. And in transition, there are a lot of things that are skills that we're trying to help people to learn. Facilitation, reflection, and inner transformation. All of these things are skills. They are not, that is not knowledge like in itself, and it's certainly not just information people are consuming. They are skills. They are things people need to practice for them to be able to learn them. And making the distinction between information, knowledge, and skills is super important for us to support learning journeys and learning processes. And for us as trainers and as people, as educators, being constantly aware of what it is we are working with. Is it something that is replicable from somewhere else? Is it something people have to internalize to be able to put it into action? Is it something they need to practice to be able to get good at it? Is absolutely critical in us supporting learners. I can talk about a lot more. I don't want to talk about a lot of this in very complex environments. I can give you some access to some of these things later on. I don't want to spend too much time on them. There's some text underneath that explains this as well that I took from my PhD thesis. So you can check out some of these models in your own time down the line. But I like to just briefly touch on two more ways of thinking about this. So we have just an understanding of what we're dealing with. There is a framework in information science that I'm very fond of, and it's very popular, and it talks about tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge. And it's a very good way of explaining things like riding a bike. So if you have a skill like riding a bike, I know how to ride a bike. So how would you teach someone else to ride ride a bike? So you have the skill of riding a bicycle, but to enable someone else, you can show them that is socialization. You can be together and do the thing together, which is the central idea behind apprenticeships. In a lot of countries, apprenticeships or mentorships is you observe the person that is doing something. You are co-facilitating with an experienced facilitator. You can't just learn facilitation from reading a book about facilitation, but when you see someone experience facilitate again and again and again, you pick up the minute details about how they read the room, how they react to certain situations, how they the way of they deal with a disruptive person in the room, about how there's so much complexity about the skill you're trying to learn, that doing it in context is really helpful. And then you internalize the things that, you know, you make your own, what you learn from others, what you observe, and that's what internalization is from. So tacit knowledge, like the things we can't put into words, is one of the descriptions often used for tacit knowledge. You can't put into words what it takes to ride a bicycle. You can't put into words what it takes to facilitate a meeting like that. You just need to practice and learn and observe from others how to do it. And so the people learning, they internalize what they're being given. If you read a document, you also internalize some of the information that's contained therein. And the person that is trying to teach you to facilitate, or trying to teach you to ride a bicycle, they externalize. They're trying to, they can't quite explain what it takes to facilitate a meeting, but they're trying anyway. They're using words to convey what it takes. And then when you have, say you have two documents, or you have two people that have explained to you in a video, say there's one video and another video, and in both videos there's someone talking about what it takes to run a launch training. And then you combine from those two videos, you develop your own understanding, taking both perspectives, and you develop your own understanding of what it takes to deliver a Thrive training. Then you're combining the knowledge that these people have tried to share, the information you've received, you're combining that, and you're building your own knowledge of what it takes to run a Thrive training. So I'm just trying to map a bit this landscape of what we're working with. And the last thing that I'll share is around belonging, doing, experience, and becoming. So as facilitators of learning processes, there is this is another framework. It's from Lave and Wenger. It's about situated learning, about social learning is a way that this is often described. Is a lot of the teaching and learning processes we support happen in context. The person is not isolated they are not robots. They're not isolated from environments. They have a history. They have a community they're embedded in, the language that they use, the language they speak. They have existing skills that they turn up with when they end up in a training that we facilitate, or end up on our website, for example. They have existing skills. They have a practice. There may be psychologists that come with their own skill set. There may be communicators with their skill sets. There may be trainers with their skill sets. So they have an existing practice, and they attribute meaning in different ways, because their lived experiences are very different. One of the things we need to consider is the culture people come from, and the communities they come from, and the way that some of those people and the communities, they look at the same thing, but they attribute different meaning to it, because their backgrounds and their experiences are different. And then identity links to what I just talked about. So meaning making and the way we see ourselves are closely connected, and closely connected to community, and closely connected to practices. So different communities will have different practices. They will attribute meaning to the same event or the same document in different ways, and it will become part of their identity in different ways as they learn and develop personally and as groups. So this is all the background I want to go into. I want to leave it at that, and maybe this is a good point, Don, for us to have just a wee break, just to digest some of the things we talked about so far, and then we'll go into some exercises and some more things that we can work on together. But before we go into the break, maybe just any clarifying questions that you want to ask at this point before we go into a short break. Is there anything you'd like me to clarify further around some of those ideas? Okay. There's Arturo.
Yes,
Adelante.
thanks, Philip, for all this, I will say, information. I don't know if this is right till now, but thanks for sharing this information. Yes, as you know, obviously when we have different language, I want to know if you can give a little more the difference between what you see between knowledge and insight. Because, for example, if you make the translation to Spanish,
Oh, can you still hear Arturo? Anyone else?
No, I think you might have frozen.
If it's okay, Philip, I'm gonna just compliment because I think he was gonna ask the same thing that I was gonna ask. I don't know if you had a continuation when you are in that first image, but I felt some lack of information. What makes a knowledge become insight, and insight a wisdom? I don't know if I miss it because you're giving the example of the bicycle. Okay.
Well, I can. So things get more complex at that point to explain, right? Because also these are not easy things to explain. So let's stick to how the diagram tries to explain this in a visual way. So what knowledge is lots of interconnected pieces of information according to this diagram. So there is information we have from the past. So whenever we receive any new information, we contextualize it in our brain. We embed it in all the things we already know. So we internalize it, and as we internalize it, we contextualize it with all the things we know, with all our experiences, with our identity, with all the meaning making and sense making we have done in our life. So that's what happens to knowledge. Insight. For me, insight is the moment where you realize that there are two things you already know that you thought were not connected. This light bulb moment that people describe and say, there is something here that I did not see before. There is two things or more. They are connected. So that is what insight and wisdom are about, is this moment where you realize, oh, wait a minute, there is something that is connected here. So in insight, and this is where I'm starting to disagree a bit with how this diagram works. So I follow on the insight, and the diagram, what they say about wisdom, I would still say that is also insight. For me, wisdom brings in time. For me, wisdom has a longevity. So for me, wisdom is the stuff that with us learning new things, there are things that are unshakable. There are truths about our world that you, as I say, you accommodate new information with the things you already know. And hopefully, as we learn, some of the new things we learn change our way of looking at the world, right? So say, you go to an anti-racism training, for example, the hope would be that anti-racism training goes so deep in you considering and reflecting about the way you look at the world, that it rearranges your worldview. So it goes so deep in your reflection. It's not like 23 kilograms and 14 kilograms together make 37 kilograms. No, but what you're going to a deeper level of start rearranging all the things from the past around a central idea like social justice. And that is, I think, where we get to the level of wisdom and of worldviews, where we start rearranging all the things from the past around new ideas that are so large and so central, and there is such truth to them that I would say there is some wisdom there. So that will then last again for a long time until something happens in your life that makes you rearrange everything again. So I don't know if that helps, but this is how I would talk about it. Shall we go to Rakesh first, Don, before we have a break? Good.
Yeah, and I see Arturo's back as well.
Okay. Yeah, let's go to Rakesh first, and then we'll go back to Arturo again.
Yeah, it was more, I was just going to see if I can give you how I understand this, which
Yeah.
is knowledge is just facts and information that is somehow interconnected. But insight is where you go beyond, for me anyway, it's where you go beyond just the knowledge. It's like, all right, you've got 23 kilos of carrots. Oh, I could eat those carrots, couldn't I? I could also take maybe the tops and grow some of them, and then I could do this with it, and then I could do that with it. And that is insight. It's going beyond just the facts, just the information only. It's going beyond, even interconnecting it. It's like, oh, I could do this, and it's where you're adding value to it. You're adding much more to it. And then wisdom, for me, is putting it into action, and then from that action gaining even more insights into it, not just through contemplation but through actual action, and it's kind of solidified and it's much more tangible because you've experienced it. So that for me is the subtle differences between them.
Okay, thanks, Rakesh. Arturo.
No, it's okay. I was saying when you had the answer that it was okay for me, the answer. No, I was not asking.
Okay. Good. So any other questions, or we'll have a brief break? Don, how long would you suggest the break to be? I don't know what you usually do.
I don't know what anybody got preference between 5 or 10 minutes?
Well, maybe we'll do 10 past.
Okay,
10 past.
let's do 7 minutes and come back at 10 past the hour then. Okay.
10 past the hour. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
See you in a minute. Yeah, thank you, everyone. I like to ask a question to trigger some reflection. So early on, I asked you to share a resource you keep going back to, that you keep using in the work you're doing, that you keep using in maybe training you're delivering, something that you find really valuable. We've shared also the links to some resources, some of those, well, all of those resources actually, in the chat earlier on. And what I like you to do is, if you already had a resource you were thinking of, then I like you to ask about this, ask yourself this question: who are our resources designed for? So use that resource and look at the resource and think about the resource, like, who was that designed for? Who was that person? Envision a person, like, this is the kind of person, this is the person that this resource was designed for. These are the things they already knew. These are the things they didn't know yet. This is the language they speak. This is the words they use to describe things. This is the meaning they see in the world. These are the things they worry about. These are the things they don't worry about. Maybe this is their age. We talked about youth training. So is this for a professional, or is this for a lay person? Is this for the general public? Is it for someone who's already inside of Transition Network? So just to reflect a little about a resource, and trying to think about, who was this resource designed for? Who was this written for? Who was this made for? Just to spend a couple of minutes just reflecting, who was this made for? And once you've reflected a little about who it may have been designed for, is ask yourself, am I that person? Is the reason I keep going back to that resource because I feel I'm a person that this resource designed for? Or am I not that person? Why do I find that resource useful? And do I think I find this resource useful because it was made for people like me, or for me particular? And I'd like to invite a few of you to share some of your reflections when you're ready. You feel free to raise your hand, and then we'll.
You can either physically raise your hand or use the reactions in the Zoom toolbar to put up your hand that way. So we have Rakesh and Frederick.
Let's go with Frederick first, and then we go to Rakesh.
Okay, thank you. It's about the resources, the principles of transition. And it was, yes, I can say it was designed for me because it was sufficient when I found these resources for me to get in touch again to the essence of the way of doing transition. And I didn't use it for trainings or even for other exchange or communication with groups, but it was a question. It gave me enough information to be sure I'm in the right movement, and the way I am working is aligned with the one of the movement.
Okay. May I ask why you didn't use it with groups?
I think I didn't organize any trainings since. If I did a training, I would use this resources because it's very synthetic and practical, and but it's not so easy to share because it gave a lot of aspects, a lot of information, and a lot of values behind this, a lot of philosophy. So if you want to share this, you need to have a conversation, I think.
Yeah.
With people who don't know, who doesn't know transition, for instance.
Yes. Very good. Thank you. So what I wanted to get to is the characteristics and the principles are very abstract. So if you can't look, if you don't have the experience of looking at a whole transition group or the movement, or look deep, as you say, philosophically, if that is not where you're at with this, then you won't find these very valuable. They won't help you with anything. You need to be able to look at it at an abstract level for them to be valuable. There is a lot of and when we have something as abstract as the principles or characteristics, what are the, how do they help you engage in a local transition group? This abstract language, you need to do a lot of translation of and meaning You need to do a lot of interpretation of what does this mean for us actually doing transition in this village, in this group.
I am actually doing a kind of simplification of these principles to help the groups, because I think that's what we have for the groups, which are made of volunteers, is too complicated, too rich, too profound. It's good for professional, but for volunteer, it's sometimes it's too much. So I try to find a kind of simplification of the principles and even of the way of doing to inspire the group. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Rakesh, and then Arturo.
Yes, so the resource that I refer to is Rob's TED Talk, and he told me once, you know, we were sitting next to each other at a conference, and he said that, you know, I told him how useful that is to me and how much I use it, and he said, well, actually, when I delivered it, so when he delivered it, he said it was because I think it was at some kind of a university for, I don't know, electronics or computing or some kind of, yeah, industrial, yeah. He said he had such a frosty reception. He said people just were like, oh, wow, you're taking away my livelihood here. And who he wrote it for was that conference, a very, very difficult audience, an extremely difficult audience. But the fact that it was on a TED talk and therefore will be presented to the whole world means that perhaps he also had a different audience in mind beyond the ones he was directly talking to. And so from that perspective, I definitely fit that audience because he captured me. And if you actually look at it, what he does really well is he has an amazing balance between facts, information, very hard to understand, very hard to grapple with information that are very uncomfortable to hear as well. So a lot of facts, a lot of images, but beautifully weaving it all together with stories and really getting the message across really beautifully and really succinctly. Packs a huge amount of information if you really analyze it, a huge amount of information in a very short space of time. So from that perspective, yes, it works very well for me to be able to tell that story and share that story with other people who are starting on this transition path.
Yeah, and just because it also relates to what Frederick said, there is stories, right? Stories. What are stories? Stories are, you know, there's a timeline, there's a thread in a story, and a lot of our stories, say we tell a story about a transition initiative or a project, it allows us to convey something very complex, which is like the experience of those people doing that thing, which is complex because life is complex. So there's this, they're telling this experience, they're telling a story about what they did, and they bring in all these different facets, and stories don't feel as overwhelming as abstract lists of characteristics, because we can identify, we can put ourselves inside the story and then understand, like a story helps us to navigate complexity. It helps us to navigate covering a lot of ground, because it's much easier to put ourselves inside of it. In a list of characteristics, there is nowhere to put you inside of a list of characteristics. But if you have a story for each characteristic, or for each fact, or an example from somewhere for each fact that relates to community and actual people, then we can put ourselves into that, and then it's less overwhelming.
Yeah, I do permaculture teacher training courses, and so when I'm teaching people to teach, what I explain to them is that very rarely will anyone ever remember even 10% of the facts that you ever tell them. Very rarely. But they will remember your passion. They will remember your they'll remember the stories and they'll remember how you presented it. And that's what inspires them. And I, this last year's permaculture convergence, someone came to me and said, "Hi, Rakesh, yeah, I was on your course like 12 years ago." And then she recounted a story, which she said, "Yeah, I haven't done anything with permaculture, but I always remembered that story." And, you know, and it's like 10 years, 10, 12 years or something. And she still remembers that story. To be honest, I don't even remember telling that story, but it might have been me, but I honestly don't even remember. But that's, stories are really passionate, as you say, and it puts you in a position where you can start questioning, well, how would I have behaved in that situation? If I was in that place, would I have done this? Would I have done that? So it helps you to start to, without having to live certain experiences, it gives you the opportunity to start making judgment calls of how, according to your ethics, according to your principles. And so it's really, really, really powerful storytelling.
Yes, and before we go to Arturo, the weakness of stories, to close this, the weakness of stories is they are very, very particular to a set of circumstances, to a situation. It is those people coming together in that moment that could make it happen in that way. So when people then think how it's inspiring, but when people then think, how are we going to do this in our place? Like, yeah, but look, they had that person with that skill set, or they had these connections. How will we ever be able to replicate that? So one of the difficulties with stories is when it then comes to people doing things themselves is they're like, yeah, but our situation is completely different. Of course it is, because it's a story. So a story, you'll always come away thinking like, that is great, that's inspiring, that's brilliant, I want to do stuff like that, and I want to achieve the things they achieved. But when you then step out and say like, okay, what can we do? You're like, well, but their situation is very different, because you learn so much about their situation, because there is so much nuance in the story, you will always think you're different. You may not be very different situation for a third person looking at it, but as you look at the story, you will be able, because there's so much detail in the story, you'll be able to say like, well, that's different, that's different, that's different, and that's different. Okay, let's go to Arturo.
Well, and when you invite us to reflect about the question, this couple of minutes, it came to my mind to change the question in the way that what our resources not designed for. Because I think that I will try to explain the two questions. I think that we are able to reach to the people, to the person who have, using your language, who have the information, who have the knowledge of what's happening now, and they want to try to involve in an organization to do something. And these are the people, for me, what the resources are designed for, the people who want to learn, the people who want to change. But in the other way, I think that we are not able to reach people because our information is not designed for them. For example, if I'm talking about the case here, for example, in Latin America, who I know more, even if I'm from Europe, but I live in Latin America, if we think in the top level to the people who work in institutions, who work in the municipalities, people who have a company, that are people who have some kind of power, some kind of resources that can be very useful for us, but these resources are not designed for them. This is in the top level. But if we go to the low level, I talk about communities, about indigenous people here in Latin America, who they don't understand this language we use. So how we can redesign these resources, not for the people who have already the information and the knowledge, and maybe also the insight, to redesign for the people who we are not able to reach. Then, because we are talking about a global movement, but always is in a very short movement. We are not able to go to a global because there are many people who escape or our way of how we share these resources. So it was the reflection get to my mind.
Yes. Thank you so much. That is excellent for us to get to the next point that I wanted to talk about. So when I look at the resources that Transition Network has, for example, most of them are designed for people that prefer reading. They are designed for people in the global north that speak English, that can digest complex and abstract information, that use, Frederick said professionals, that look at the information as professionals, not every person that you may find in this, you meet in the street when you go to your town. So there is, it comes from people that are white, middle class, based in the UK. A lot of that information comes from the UK in particular, and has been designed for a UK audience. And some of the documents go back 5 to 10 years. At that point, the movement wasn't nearly as international as it is now. So one of the things for us to constantly be aware of, once you put something down in paper or you record it in some way or a video, that's a moment in time, right? And it speaks to the movement at that moment in time. And the other thing that I want to make us aware of is that most times resources are designed for people like the people that are designing them. So a lot of resources are made for people like me. Like, I do the resource, my understanding of the world, my way of looking at things, my language, my culture. A lot of resources we have come from the culture that designs it and are for that culture. In that culture, they make most sense. Whether or not it's a subculture or a broader culture, whatever the culture it comes from, that is the culture in which they will make most sense. And so one of the things that I am hoping to help with in my role in Transition Network is that we start having a lot more diverse viewpoints represented in where we create, and languages, how we create resources in the movement, and also create resources that speak to more than one person. And there is techniques we can use in design thinking, for example, like personas, that will help us to do that. So I want us to get much more proficient at designing resources and making information accessible in different formats, for example, or in different languages. Like, we could have the guide to transition. The guide to transition right now is only accessible if you're willing to read a long document. That's the only way you're going to get to that information. But there is information in our movement that is so important that it should be accessible to the visually impaired. It should be accessible to those who need it, who need it in shorter form, that those that are dyslexic, for example, as Rakesh mentioned earlier. Like, we need to get much better at things like that. So one thing that I'm hoping that we all keep thinking about as we create resources and training materials is, who are we designing this for? And how much do I know about the people I'm designing this for? Or am I just assuming I'm designing it for people like myself? And it's fine to design information resources for people like yourself. Of course it is. But it's important to be aware that that is what we're doing. To not assume that what I put down here or what I record is going to be useful for everyone. And I'm going to share it with everyone, and I'm going to expect everybody to understand. And in the way that Arturo just explained it nicely, is we need to reckon with some of this. So there is a last aspect I want to touch on as we have half an hour left, and that is learning journeys and the role that resources can play in learning journeys. So This is a diagram of a learning journey. So this is secondary school. So people finish primary school, and then this learning journey tries to describe how it is at this school to go through the different years, going through education, year 8, year 9, year 10, year 11, until these students, year 13, until these students finish school. So here they finish year 13 school in this schooling system. I don't even know which country this is from, it's irrelevant. But in year 13, these pupils finish school and they decide, do I go to university, do I go to college, or do I do an apprenticeship? So they follow this process from primary school all the way to year 13. And that is where they decide to go. And there is various arrows here that can point in different directions where they go from here. But all the way along this track, the institution, the school, thinks there are things they all go through. There are milestones, there are exams, there are things they'll be learning. There's this learning journey that all our pupils will be going through. So at different intervals, they'll be confronted with information resources, right? There'll be books they are asked to read, lectures they are asked to listen to. So things that are the same for everyone. Everyone will have to pass the same exam. Everyone will have to know the same bit of data and information to be able to pass that exam. There are steps that they are all expected to take to qualify within this system. And there's a few things I like to point out about learning journeys like this. The first thing is that they're linear. So a lot of learning journeys that we design as educators are linear learning journeys. And we'll come back to what that means later. Another thing that a lot of the learning journeys we design assume, if you look at it from the educator's perspective, from the school, from the trainer, from the teacher's perspective, they think about what's going to be the same for everyone. And they use that as the lowest common denominator to design the experience with. They'll say, like, these are the steps these students will go through, and all of them will go through the same steps. All of them will have to read these information resources or listen to the same stuff. So because delivery is one to many, right? It's one person sharing with many. And this is how people often think about learning journeys. So you will be designing a training, and there's a beginning and then there's an end. And between the beginning and an end, there is steps. There is that session, then there's that session, then there's that session, then there's a break, then there's that session, there's that session. And for each session, you will usually try to design, this is the learning outcome for that session, that's the learning outcome for that session, that's the learning outcome for that session. And they are the same for everyone. However, what we've just said is not everyone turns up with the same skills, with the same community, with the same pre-existing practices, not everybody is the same. They have different backgrounds, cultures, languages, and so on and so forth. So one thing that I like us to do, I like us to be cautious and with information resources when we support people learning. And I like us to be cautious with linear learning journeys. And I like us to consider more of these aspects. And I like us to talk about what it means when we consider practice, community, identity, and meaning in us supporting people learning about transition. How does training change when we think about practice, community, meaning, and identity? How does it change when we think about we are designing learning for people that come from very different places, that have very different experiences, that have very different skills? And one thing I like to complement that with something like this. So this is a learner journey mapping template. And one of the things, this is a linear process here, from awareness to consideration, to purchase, to retention, to advocacy. So this is a popular way of framing some of this, is you would become aware of a topic, you'll consider it, you might make a purchase on this particular journey, then there is retention, like customer retention in this, like people keep coming back to you, or people keep coming back to a topic, and then they may share what they've learned, or they may get other people to come to your website. So one of the things I like to create awareness of is that at different stages in these learning journeys, there is different things we use to support people along the way. And this is about a website, and they're trying to sell stuff. They have an e-commerce shop. But this is how this looks when you do something like that for a master's degree. You can get access to this and look at it in more detail down the line. But what you see up here is topics. So these are the topics that are being covered. Each one of these vertical lines is a topic that's covered. So that's content. So there's the content that's being covered. And they have put some phases in. So there's some phases. The first phase is the joining phase, and then they learn about policy, then they learn about theory, then they're being taught methods, then they're learning about policy in practice, learning about teaching models and teaching theory. And then they go again back to policy, and then they're leaving. And then along the left here, you have three categories. One is formal learning, the other is applied learning, and the third is further learning. So that at the London School of Economics, they use this as a framework to talk about what are the different ways in which we support learning. We support learning by formal means, by applied means, and through further learning. So there is the formal learning, which is lectures, discussions, teamwork, networking, individual work, and background reading. That's like the conventional lecturing at university. And then there's applied learning, where they do practical exercise, they do testing and develop models, and they get to do activities. And it's the applied learning, experiential learning, people call that sometimes. And then there's further learning, where they can engage with further things that London School of Economics offers them, further experiences where they can develop skills that are relevant to the degree they are taking. So one of the things that where I want to finish with from my own viewpoint today is I hold a communications role in Transition Network. I hold a resources role in Transition Network. And you all have different perspectives on helping people learn about transition. Part of the reason why I've come today is I want us to think about the learning journeys people embark upon to learn about transition. The training you deliver is one part of it. Resources that I am responsible for is a second part of it. Stories and blog posts we publish on our website or on a newsletter or on our YouTube channel are another part of it. All these different information resources contribute to people learning about transition. And then we also have things like mentoring. Locally in communities, people shadow others when they facilitate a meeting and they learn from that. We have people in the hubs learning from each other. We have a lot of peer learning going on. We have sessions like this where we co-create knowledge, right? So we come together and we share resources we find useful, and we share with others how we use those resources in our own practice as educators. So there are all these different ways in which people learn. And one thing I'm really keen to do is I want to make it really easy for people, for different kinds of people, for different types of people, to navigate all the different ways in which they can learn about transition. And in my view, we have to come together as transition educators, as people that help people understand what transition is about, and think about how do people learn about transition? How do they find out about transition? So, for example, a transitioner speaks to someone that is not a transitioner in their local community about, I'm going to go to that transition meeting tomorrow. They ask, what is the transition meeting? They'll be talking about the local community. When they want to find out more, they will be talking about maybe the transition group in that town has a Facebook group. You can go there and ask questions when the next meeting is. Then they will have gotten into their local transition group. And then they say, well, how, these are the things we're doing. How do they learn to run a new project in their local community? Whom do they learn that from? To say, I want to start a repair shop. Where do they learn running a repair shop if there isn't already a repair shop in their community? When they then have started a repair shop, how do they get better at running a repair shop? How do they connect to other people running repair shops in different communities and improve their repair shops? Or they struggle with something in starting their repair shop. How do they learn that? How do they get better at running a repair shop? And then maybe they keep going. Maybe someone can point them to the Transition Network website and say, well, there's an explanation here about how other people run a repair shop. There's a list of things you need to consider when you start a repair shop. And there are some videos where other people have explained how they started repair shops. And then maybe this person that runs a repair shop now say, like, in my community, I want a lot more people to join me in running transition projects. So I want to train other people in my community about how to run projects that are transition inspired. So how are they going to come from running a repair shop to becoming a trainer that helps others to run projects like a repair shop in their community? Where are they going to get that support? What's the information they will need? What's the support that they can get? So what I'm describing is just one person and their learning journey about how they engage with transition. And one thing that I am really keen to do with the trainers is I'm trying to think through, how do we support people along the way? What different types of journeys are there that people are on? How do they come into the transition movement? And how can we make it much easier for them to get better at doing this kind of work in their communities, or at the hubs level, or whatever other level we're talking about? So I want to leave it at this for now. And I want to just say the work that I'm embarking upon is trying to think about these journeys that people take. Who is taking what kind of journey, and how do we support them along the way? And also, how can, for example, the website where we have blogs and information resources, how can that get people interested in signing up for a training? So we feed them with small pieces of information that make them really interested, that lay some of the foundations and trigger them wanting to get engaged deeper and deeper and deeper in transition. But how do we get them to a point where they then say, I want to now pay to go onto a training course with that trainer who is delivering the Thrive training, or a Train the Trainer training where I learn how to train other people in my community? How do we get people to that point? What is it they need to know already to be able to make that step into wanting to pay for a training, or wanting to apply for a training stipend, or whatever it is? So I'll leave it at that for me today. Don, you can maybe facilitate a little more around this topic, because you have your training hat on, obviously, and I step back into my communications hat. And so I want to make the offer that I'm here, I'm doing this work. I want to support trainers to attract people into their training. I want to support this peer learning processes. I want us to be able to use the website and social media and all sorts of tools we have to attract people into training, but also to educate people about transition. And I'll leave it at that, and I'll hand to Don maybe for the final parts. If there are any clarifying questions or anything, I'm open to wherever it goes from here.
Great, thank you so much, Philip. Do you mind turning off the Great, perfect. So yeah, I'd love to hear from others what ideas you all have about, how can we take some of this learning that we've done today, some of what Philipp has presented, and operationalize it in the work that we're doing as trainers and as educators for transition. I mean, one thing that I'm thinking about is, there's so many different types of people with so many different interests that it's going to be impossible to create one learning journey, right, that works for everybody. So, what that brings up for me is that whenever we're teaching, we're putting together an information resource, or we're doing a training or a talk or something, anything, to provide many different options for how people can continue on, to signpost to additional resources that are related, that people might find useful, considering a particular topic. If we're talking about economy, signposting to other economy resources. If we're talking about policy, maybe signposting to municipalities and transition resources, and also making suggestions for next steps. So there's always somewhere more to go. You can get involved, you can start a local transition initiative, you can become a trainer, you can donate, you can spread the word about this on social media, you could come to our next event. Getting good at doing that to help people find their own learning journey through this, so that they continue on, so that they don't just get one piece, because obviously this transition is very complex and multifaceted, and for us to be effective transition activists, we all need to kind of become students of this movement and what's happening out there in the world. So that's my thought, but I'd love to hear from some other folks in the last 10 minutes. How do we make use of what we've been talking about here today? And feel free to just raise your hand virtually, or I'll take stack. Zaida.
Yes, just 30 seconds here to thank Philipp. I think it was very inspiring to hear all of this, and thank you, Don. Also, two things to talk. Because I'm a little more dedicated to the inner transition, I think it's important to talk about the timeless resources. We haven't talked about them. We talked so much about racism and culture and this and that. I think it's very important of talking about timeless resources and how we pass them on. And the other thing I want to say is the resource that we are as individual. How can we really live as what we are experiencing, teaching, or not teaching, but bringing others. So we as a living being that live what we are talking. So I think this is a very important to add to this whole package. And I love this topic. I would love to be around all these teachings and help as much as I can. Thank you so much. And I'll pass to the next that wants to talk.
Excellent. Thank you, Zaida. Mauricio, I think you had your hand up. You're going to need to unmute yourself. Let's see, I'll ask you to unmute here. See if that helps. We're still not able to hear you.
And now.
Yes, there we go.
Okay, wonderful. I thank Philip for your information and how you say, and have the opportunity to reflect about these issues, because suddenly you are doing so many things that you don't have too much time to reflect about what you are doing. And I am using a set of information that I have from the old time, when I made my course like 10 years ago. And actually, always I'm looking for the new one. Where is the new one, the most updated one? But my experience, I have been lucky to be making transition course in Chile, in Colombia, in Guatemala with Maya people, in the East Europe with youth, with academical people, and in Chile also with the academical people, engineer, and also with poor neighborhood. And of course, every time you make a launching, you have to appropriate in some way, and you have to, how you say, to point to what you feel. You have the feeling that is the need of the people, But anyway, with the time pass, when I see all this experience, I had the feeling that we have a lot of wisdom, or a lot of, how you say, very good element in the transition time course. I mean, several of the aspects are really interesting, and actually not only for people who want to do a transition, but people who want to change the world. And the thing that I have looking around, I mean, we have so many good input from different places, I have been lucky to be in Chile when it was a social explosion, the people meeting in the park, wanted to change everything. And they're willing to do things. I mean, in this, I was, how you say, cultural there, and I wanted to be back there, because the people are asking what I can do, how I can do that. And I make sort of speech in this different group, and I get the impression. And now I was in Colombia at the beginning of the year. It's the same thing, People want to change the world. And I mean, like, obvious it's not all of them, but you have a good, how you say, group of people who want to do things. Especially now in Colombia, that you have a president that also want to do good things. And I think that we have very good elements, and sometimes you need to, when you are in the place and how what the people are looking for, in some way you appropriate the content of the course. Perhaps sometimes it's more example, sometimes it's more, how you say, with academical people, for instance, they don't know, but at the end they like to make theater because they are so focused in the mind, that sometimes you change them to do another things, and they like it. And the other thing that when we see a transition, that you pointing very well this, Philip, that you have to know your audience, and what they want to do. I mean, who you want to reach, because if you are talking to rich people, it should be in some way. You're talking with poor people, to another way. But like I said, my general reflection is that we have a good richness in the course. And when you are in different situations, you should balance it a little bit. Mm-hmm. And even in some time, have we only self-development for any transition, because I feel that the people know a lot of other things, and they need to go inside and try to make deep change in the way of living, but not preaching what you should do, but what you, how you say, can facilitate them to find themselves. But anyway, I like the idea that we have to change another format to spread the news in some way.
Before we close, I'd like to quickly react to what Zaida and Mauricio just said, and I'll just quickly share my screen again, because it's something I didn't get to. I think as educators, the facilitation and how we hold space is as important as the content, if not more important. And that is, I think, the wisdom, like holding space for inner transformation and inner transition, as well as for the different audiences, is what people want to do is they want to change the society we're part of and they are part of. And pedagogy and how educators hold space. And I take my inspiration from Deschooling Society and Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Those are the roots of my thinking about education, is the how we hold these spaces is as important as the content we try to convey, and probably more important. So there is something to transition that's about how we hold these spaces, and that relates very much to things like inner transition, for example, and people experiences what's different about transition. I'll leave it at that.
All right, so we're actually going to need to wrap up now, but I'm willing to stay on to continue this conversation if anybody wants to. I want to thank Philipp again for a very thought-provoking presentation. I'm sure we'll be bringing some of these threads forward as we continue to work in the trainers community practice. And I think we have a great opportunity here, for a number of years in the early stages of the transition movement. Training was kind of more tightly controlled. It was, we had the launch training, maybe Thrive, Sophie and Naresh trained all the trainers. There was a way to do it that was supposed to be done everywhere. And we're moving towards greater flexibility and recognizing that there are many ways to teach the same material that work for many different kinds of people in many different places. And I hope going forward, we'll be doing a lot more resource creation and resource sharing with each other to learn from each other all the different ways that we can teach transition. I do want to make a few announcements before we close here. So our next training conversation is not up yet, but will be very soon. It's going to be with our dear colleague Rakesh on April 25th on creating harmonious teaching environments. And Rakesh has a lot of interesting things to be said about that, having taught more than 600 different trainings over the past decade plus. So please do save the date for that, and there'll be an announcement coming out soon. I will also make sure to share the recording for this on the transition platform, along with starting a document with some of the links to resources that we put in the chat here that we can build over time to have a kind of listing of different resources that are available to us as trainers to use. And some of you all might have seen this announcement yesterday. We are developing a pilot version of a new online Train the Trainers course called Transition Facilitators Training that will be offered this fall, and reaching out to the training community to apply to teach a session or two. So if this is something you might be interested in, please check this out. There's a very short application form that's due by April 15th. And if you aren't on the platform yet or in the training for transition space, I highly suggest that you do that. I'm happy to help you get on there if you're having any trouble. My email is training@transitionnetwork.org. And you can see, there's a lot of great things that are being posted here. Just earlier today from Transition Together, a new resource about Transition Thrive training that we all can learn from. So please do get connected on the platform, and if I can help with that, let me know. So lots of stuff coming up. We will stay in touch. Thank you all for coming, and feel free to stay on if you would like.